This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
After the timeout, from the 10, probably the final play of the game. In regulation. It is caught by Dyson. Can he get in? No, he cannot. Mike Jones made the tackle. And the Rams have won the Super Bowl.
No line. The game is over. The game is over.
Today, we're taking you back to January 30th, 2000, the new millennium, Y2K, also Super Bowl 34, 1 yard short, Titans, Rams, a classic Super Bowl played in Atlanta, and we're going through it all today on Distant Replay. I am Ben George, along with Mike Noto. Glad to have you. Mike, going back, over 20 years now. Hard to believe it's already been 20 years since this game, but probably one of the better finishes ever in Super Bowl history.
Hard to believe this game was 20 years ago now. And looking back at some of the storylines from this game and sort of reliving them through watching it was one of the most eye-opening parts to me.
So we'll go through it all today. We've got players, great storylines with the players, coaches, the franchises, how they got to this point. Really not a lot of success up until now, and much, much more throughout this game. I'm going to remind you, too, DistantReplayPodcast.com is the website. We'll put this game up there. You can go back and watch it in its entirety as it aired on ABC. We'll also have Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all places you can connect with us. Again, hit subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast, plus on YouTube. We thank all the new subscribers we have on the channel as well. And it's been a lot of fun over these last few weeks watching the platform grow, and we appreciate all of your support for the show. So let's jump into this game, Mike. January 30th, 2000. This game played in the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. And I don't know if you've probably never been to the Georgia Dome, but that was one of my favorite venues. When you went inside that place, it felt like a big game stadium, maybe because you had all these big events played there, SEC championship game, you had Final Four, Super Bowl, but the light coming through the dome was kind of had a bright feel to it. This was just a really classic venue. I hate that it's gone now.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about the Georgia Dome, Ben, over the years, and it's one of those venues that when you talk about it, it makes me like kind of wish that I could have watched the game there. You know, with the way you talk about it, and you describe it perfectly. And we talked about last week how in the 80s in Miami, how you always thought, oh wow, it's the 80s in Miami, it must be a big game. Well, in this particular time period, when I think about the Georgia Dome, what was unique about it was what you just hit on. I remember it from Super Bowls. I remember it from college basketball games. I remember it from, all these different events that sort of marked this time period. So great venue for this one.
Yeah, don't forget about the Olympics as well. This is a big time period for Atlanta, and there's so much going on. Like if the Miami was the 80s, I mean, you can almost say Atlanta in the 90s was pretty big sports destination, and kind of concludes this decade with this.
The Braves are succeeding at this time and really emerging.
Good point. Braves are really good at this time too. They had wrestling. They had kind of everything down there. So great atmosphere, great venue. It's no longer in existence. It's absolutely been wiped out, and they got the Mercedes-Benz Stadium there now. So if you missed it, I hate it for you, but it was a great place to watch a game. But that was where these two teams faced off for the Super Bowl. And I think starting with this game, you got to kind of talk about where these two franchises are and where they had been, because as you talked about, this was a matchup of two teams that had never been in a Super Bowl before, two teams you don't equate with a lot of success in the NFL. But when you start with the Rams, I mean, this is a franchise that was dreadful for a very long time. And they essentially, now they've been pretty good since, but this was the start of them kind of coming into their own with Dick Vermeil, with that high-powered offense. And it was a very big surprise to even see them in this position.
Yeah, they went from 4-12 the season before to 13-3 this season. To me, there was three real main things that sort of kickstarted this whole thing. You had Vermeil getting hired as coach.
Yep.
You had the trade for Marshall Faulk. And then lastly, of course, you had the injury to Trent Green with Kurt Warner coming in at quarterback, which we'll get to here in a second. But, this is one of those Super Bowls where both teams didn't really have that much of a history in terms of Super Bowls. And typically when this happens, it's usually one team that doesn't have the history. Like I think of Steelers, Cardinals. Cardinals didn't have the history. Buccaneers, Raiders. The Bucs didn't have a history at that point. But this was unique because two teams were in the same situation. And the Rams, even though their franchise, both franchises had history, but the Rams, I mean, they had been treading water at best for a while leading into this season.
Yeah, they had. And it's pretty crazy because, I mean, talk about being unexpected. I mean, this team did not have any expectations. You talked about the 4-12 the year before, and I think they played a little bit better than they had in previous years, but they hadn't been to the playoffs since 1989, okay? So a decade since their last playoff appearance. But ESPN, the magazine, rest in peace, their NFL preview that year had the Rams as the worst team in the NFL, worse than even the Cleveland Browns, who, if you remember, just returned as an expansion team that year. So, I mean, when you're talking about no expectations, literally zero expectations on this team.
It's nuts to think that a team with, looking back on it now, a team with this offensive talent alone, would be ranked the last team in terms of rankings in the NFL. That's pretty eye-opening. Not a great moment for ESPN, the magazine, for sure. But remember, them being bad the year before allowed them to take Torrey Holt with the 6th pick overall. So he's a rookie in this game, and he was just one of the elements of this offense that put them into another stratosphere.
Yeah, and you talk about that offense and the players. We kind of touched on some of them, so let's kind of continue there. But yeah, Torrey Holt, who was a great player over the course of his career, a great addition to this offense. But then you had Isaac Bruce, and I gotta be honest with you. Going back and researching this game, I didn't realize Isaac Bruce was a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, so this is kind of a bone of contention I have with the NFL Hall of Fame. The bar for receivers to get in the Hall of Fame, now Isaac Bruce was great, right? But there's a lot of receivers that you probably wouldn't think like ever were in like the top 4 or 5 in football that are in the Hall of Fame. Think about how many receivers you've seen over the last 10 or 15 years that are better than Isaac Bruce.
Yeah.
All those guys are going to get in. They set the bar too low with receivers. I think that's why Isaac Bruce got in. With that said, look, Isaac Bruce was a tremendous player, okay? But even you saying he was in the Hall of Fame, I remember he was when you said it. If you asked me that question before right now, I would have had to look it up.
Yeah. Well, when they go through the lineups in this game, you don't think – now you would, but when I watched it, I didn't think Isaac Bruce, Hall of Famer I'm looking at, right? He's not a guy that when I'm looking through that offensive roster, when they're showing up the starting lineups in this game, that I think of him as one of the top players on the field, because you had Orlando Pace along the offensive line who, one of the greats to ever play that position. And, huge guy. You had Warner, obviously. You had Marshall Faulk, you talked about. So you had all these other guys. I mean, Isaac Bruce was kind of a secondary thought for me, and maybe that's my bad for kind of feeling that way based on kind of where he was, because this team also had Kevin Carter, Todd Light, DeMarco Farr. They had a lot of guys that were Pro Bowlers on this team as well. So they were pretty much loaded from top to bottom. And to have a Rookie of the Year like Torrey Holt on top of that, you can see why this team kind of took those strides that it did.
Now, Ben, count with me here. Warner's a Hall of Famer, right?
Yep.
Falk, 2. Bruce, 3. Orlando Pace, 4. Right? That's 4 Hall of Famers. Holt's first year of eligibility was last year. He didn't get in. But, hey, look, if Bruce got in and Holt was a better receiver than Bruce, in my opinion, then I guess Holt has to get in eventually, right? So you're talking about 5 Hall of Famers from this team, from this offense.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right?
It's incredible. I'm trying to think if the Steelers back in the day had 5 Hall of Famers on offense. I can't think of any other offenses that had 5 Hall of Famers. Even like those Cowboy teams, they had Aikman, Irvin, Emmitt Smith, and then Larry Allen. I don't know if any of their other offensive linemen, but you get what I'm saying?
Right.
It's incredible when you go back and look at it. And Kevin Carter led the league in sacks, and this defense also had London Fletcher among the other names you mentioned. Yeah,
they were loaded, and it's kind of surprising that they were thought about so lowly starting the year. But when you see what their past look like, it's not a surprise that many people were caught off guard by how good this team was. But a lot of that too, Dick Vermeil, who was in retirement for a while. I think that's another big part of the story. This was such a Hollywood type story because you had Vermeil, who had kind of been out of retirement, had kind of done this before in the 80s, but now he's coming back and reviving this franchise and got them to this big stage. And they had Kurt Warner, who, if you don't really remember, Kurt Warner was such a huge story that year because of his background. He was bagging groceries not that long before getting into the NFL. He played on the Arena League. He played in NFL Europe when it was still around. I mean, this guy was essentially out of football, and to go from that point to taking over for Trent Green when he got hurt to getting to this spot. I mean, as Al Michaels said in this broadcast, if you presented the script to Hollywood, they're not even going to believe it because it seems so improbable.
Yeah, Kurt Warner was the story in football that year, maybe the story in sports almost. And when you now, even to this day, when you hear about people talk about like these feeder systems for football, like these new leagues that pop up, people will bring up NFL Europe and Arena League, how, Kurt Warner came from those leagues. You'll still hear it to this day. And of course, Vermeil, they went through it in this broadcast, how he was the fifth option for them as far as head coaches went. Bobby Ross ahead of him, Pete Carroll, Kevin Gilbride, Jim Mora Sr., right? So he wasn't even the Rams' first pick. Warner wasn't their first pick at quarterback, but these two together made magic happen. No other way to put it. Yeah,
it's pretty crazy to think about. It all worked out for them perfectly, thankfully, for their sake. On the other side, you had the Titans. Tennessee Titans came into this. And when you talk about the Titans, you got to kind of remember where they are at this point in their franchise history. I mean, this is their first season in their new stadium, right? Which now I think is Nissan Stadium. But they had been playing first off in Memphis for a year. They played over in Vanderbilt for a couple of years while they were getting the stadium built in Nashville. So this team was in transition after moving from Houston, and became the Tennessee Oilers in '97, the Titans in '99. So this is a brand new franchise, which kind of adds to kind of the mystique of this team and kind of where they are right now. But I don't really think about that when I think back to this team, Mike. I remember kind of who they were, and I'd kind of pulled for them a little bit. I had started pulling for them. They moved to Tennessee before I went to work for the Titans Radio Network for a little bit. So I don't remember, though, this being their very first year in Nashville when all this happened. But we went back a few episodes ago, and did the Music City Miracle, which is the start of this playoff run for them. This team just kind of had that special, everything kind of playing together and working itself out this season, that maybe kind of a storybook in its own right, the way this thing played out.
If you look on Pro Football Reference, which I love, they list the top 100 games of all time in the NFL history. 2 of them came from this Titans playoff run.
That's crazy.
Which is incredible when you step back and think about it. We have a young Jeff Fisher coaching this team, and I didn't know he was teammates with Bruce Matthews at USC.
That's crazy, right?
I never realized that I know they both went to USC. I didn't realize like around the same time. I thought that was interesting. I still sometimes say Oilers when I talk about the Titans. I know it's like an old school way to do it, but hey, Ben, one thing I want to ask you, are their uniforms are still the same from back then, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, there might be some small tweaks to them, but yeah, essentially they're same uniforms.
I mean, they have to be the only team, one of the only teams besides the really, really traditional teams that have had the same uniforms for 20 years.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it. I don't really think about NFL uniform changes that much because they're so traditional, but yeah, I mean, they haven't. Once they made that switch over, they've kind of kept things the same, for whatever that's worth. Maybe they need to change it up with the way their franchise has gone since
things
then.
like this,
Yeah,
anything but the actual action on the field, Ben. One of those guys.
Well, you mentioned Bruce Matthews because he was on this team, of course, another Hall of Famer in this game. But you talk about Jeff Fisher. It's funny because you look at why he ended up essentially leaving Tennessee is because he had some really good years with Steve McNair, but for the most part, they were kind of middle of the road. They had some 10-win seasons. They had some pretty good years, but they couldn't really go deep in the playoff outside of this first year. But it's funny, going into this season, Fisher had gone 7-9, 8-8, 8-8, 8-8 in his first 4 seasons coaching this Oilers Titans team.
Yeah, then that's what he would become known for as coach of the Titans and then eventually the Rams, is always being in that 7-9, 8-8, 9-7 sort of realm there. I think he gets sort of a bum rap for that. I like Jeff Fisher as a coach. I never thought of him as like an upper echelon coach. I think what actually ended up hurting him in a weird way is that he lasted so long at 2 different stops when his teams were never, except for outside of 2 or 3 seasons with the Titans, his teams were never that great.
Right.
And he sort of stuck around. I know it might be a weird way to look at it, but it was just a year after year after year of his teams being mediocre that I think he should be thought of better as a head coach when we look back than he probably is.
Yeah, but he had some good players. McNair, Eddie George, Javon Curse, Vince Young. I mean, Vince had 1 or 2 good years. But you know what I'm saying? Like, he had some guys that were winning big awards in the NFL, but just could never get to the hump. This was by far their best season, their best opportunity. And, they came into this game having, trailed in every playoff game. The Bills, obviously, we've that's well documented. They had the divisional game against the Colts. They won that one 19-16. The AFC Championship against the Jaguars, who had the best record in the NFL that year. They got behind early, ended up winning that game 33-14, so it didn't turn out to be a close game. They'd gotten behind in every game this year. So, I mean, it feels like, now looking back on it, it was like they hung on as long as they could. They just didn't quite have enough juice to get to the finish line. Yeah,
I mean, even when you look like McNair a couple of years later would be, co-MVP of the league. But this season for McNair, he wasn't great. This was an Eddie George-focused team with an opportunistic defense. And we'll get to who led that defense here in a second, which I could talk about for the whole podcast. You know that. But McNair, 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions this season, missed 6 games of the season. And his backup was Neil O'Donnell, which I did not remember.
Yeah.
Can you get more opposite players at this period in time than Steve McNair and Neil O'Donnell?
Right. That was pretty crazy. I'd forgotten about that too. But, I mean, he was kind of a bigger name at that time too. He had a great 90s, Neil O'Donnell did. And he made for a good backup.
I'm more talking in terms of typically
their style of play.
Yeah, exactly. You try to tailor the offense a certain way, you have to change the whole offense once you bring Neil O'Donnell in.
Hey, just hand the ball off. Just keep handing the ball off to Eddie George. I guess the secret. And you can see Eddie, man. Eddie was really good this game and this season. He's a classic running back. I think he's a guy that kind of plays in any era. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, picture like a Derrick Henry, but maybe not as fast and maybe not as big, right?
Yeah.
But for this day and age, he was fast and big. If that makes sense at all.
Right. Very powerful, very fast.
And he could play in any era, Eddie George, because he was good catching the ball out of the backfield. He got one of those guys that got stronger as the game went on. That trait alone reminds me of Derrick Henry the most.
Right.
But just at this point, he's as good as it gets as an actual. These two running backs in this game were about as good as it got for NFL running backs back then.
Good point. The weapon wise, McNair had Frank Wycheck, his tight end, Kevin Dyson, who made obviously the big play in this game that came up short, Derek Mason. Some guys that were okay, had solid NFL careers, I guess. Nothing spectacular. So, you can kind of see why his numbers weren't that crazy when you look at the way that McNair played that year, throwing for 2,100 yards, 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, I think, as you said. But, without the weapons he had, I mean, what do you truly expect,
Yeah, you hit on at the end. You were being very nice at the beginning there. Make no mistake about it. The offensive weapons he had around him were not that good. They were all average players. But when you have a young quarterback like this, that's not a great drop back passer. You need to give him some weapons on the outside. You need to give him something. And I think as the weapons improve for him throughout the years, you saw him get better. But at this point, it's pretty much Steve McNair trying to do it all by himself with a little Frank Wycheck mixed in when it came to the passing game.
And don't forget too, he dealt with back surgery that year too. They mentioned that during the game, so he had some injury issues there as well. So defensive wise, what do you think about these defenses?
I think for the Rams, they're another one of these teams we seem to talk about a lot, where their offense, because it was probably one of the greatest offenses of this era of football, maybe of football ever in terms of this season, their defense is underrated.
Right.
And I think the same thing with the Titans as well. When we think of this team, we think of Steve McNair. But when you have, Javon Curse was the freak, right? That year, his rookie year was great. I think both these defenses, were sort of better than you remember.
Yeah.
That's probably the way I would put it. And especially the Titans. This is the second game in this playoff run we've done. And in both games, I had the feeling like, hey, man, this offense really can't move the ball. And the Titans defense is keeping them in the game.
Yeah, they played pretty well. I mean, they don't have a ton of names that you'll think about now. I mean, Curse obviously was the freak for a reason. That was his rookie year, but they had a pretty good secondary and they just had a really quality group. Not many superstars, but just a quality group at every level, and it kept them in this game and did a really good job against the best offense in the league. And although they gave up a bunch of yards, they didn't give up a bunch of points and kept the Titans in it, despite the Titans having a real struggle offensively in this game. So that's our lead into this game. Anything else pregame, Mike, we need to set the stage with, or we want to hop in?
I just thought that was interesting. The Rams' last championship was in 1951. Obviously, the Oilers and Titans never. They never the first Super Bowl. The Jeff Fisher part, the Kurt and Brenda Warner story. I mean, you could do a whole separate podcast just on that.
Yeah.
But I just like kind of forgotten about Brenda Warner.
Yeah, me too.
The only 1 week in between the conference championship and the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
this is one of those years.
Yeah,
which I thought was unique.
Yeah, I had that listed as an item I might mention outdated, but yeah, I mean this and I don't really know why the scheduling was like that. Do you? Because reading back on it, it's only the fourth time that the Super Bowl was played 1 week after the conference championship games. At this point,
what you said the actual date before? I'm sorry. What was the actual date of the game?
January 30th.
Oh yeah, so it's not like if they had it the next week, it would have been a big deal.
Yeah, so I don't know what the scheduling was like. Why only a few years played out like that? I don't really know, but that was the case here for this one. And also pregame wise too. Keep in mind this also had a bunch of weather stuff going on. There's 2 ice storms in Atlanta leading up to this game. They actually did a really good job of kind of keeping the area manageable for people on foot, the fans going to the game, travel. So that was also a big storyline. There was some concerns about whether or not the travel and the players and the fans would be affected by all the ice storms going on, but they were able to get everything off, and credit to the city of Atlanta for that. But they also thought, Mike, because of that it hurt their chances for other Super Bowls later when they bid for them. They thought that the weather really hampered them I think they missed on one that they actually, when they put in their bid for it, they actually included like weather forecast information. Like this time of the year is typically this weather, so they didn't have to worry about it. But for a while they thought that was a big deal and cost them a couple Super Bowls potentially.
Interesting. I never knew that. And do you want to get into the Mike Martz, Greg Williams dynamic right now, or do you want to wait?
Yeah, go for it.
I thought this game was one big macho contest between Mike Martz and Greg Williams.
Explain.
These two are probably the biggest personality coordinators. When you're dealing with 2 head coaches that don't have, in my opinion, didn't have huge personalities, in terms of making the game about them, as compared to Mike Martz's offense, the greatest show on turf, versus Dr. Heat and Greg Williams.
Yeah.
If you don't know where I get Dr. Heat from, that's Greg Williams' self-given nickname.
Self-given.
A defensive coordinator who gave himself the nickname Dr. Heat. And if you know how his tenure with the Jets just ended, that nickname becomes about 100 times more funny. But all kidding aside, Mike Martz, you knew he was going to throw the ball all over the lot. Greg Williams, you knew he was going to bring the heat. And it was just a great dynamic between these 2 very big personalities as this game unfolded.
Yep. Let's jump into it. ABC had the call. It was Al Michaels, Boomer Esiason, who I completely forgot being a part of the Monday Night Football package, and then calling a Super Bowl as well. And then you had Leslie Visser and Lynn Swann on the sidelines. And it's funny we're doing this game now because we just came off, Boomer in the Super Bowl losing to the 49ers, and he kind of referenced some of that as well. So, yeah, it kind of tied into what we'd already just seen.
Yeah, so I went through this last episode, but I really like Boomer, so I can't say anything bad about him. He's really good on radio. I know no one listens to the NFL on radio, but
yeah,
he's very good on radio. I think he's better on radio and better in the studio than he is on TV, although I thought he did pretty well in this game. And Al Michaels is just, consummate, reliable, dependable, does a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Titans in this game were a 7-point underdog to the Rams, and the total, Mike, do you know what the total was in this game? What would you guess the total?
I'm surprised to hear that the Titans were only 7-point underdogs because, again, their offense just wasn't good at all. But what was the over-under? You
have a guess? Considering that you had an offense like this.
I'd say 48.
45
okay.
points. So that's actually lower than I kind of thought. I guess, and I'm thinking, when this day and age, 50s are pretty common for a lot of NFL games. So 45 for the greatest show on turf, and a 7-point favorite for the Rams. So we get into it, and this game really, we know the finish, but getting to that fourth quarter, it's a bit of a drag. One interesting nugget, the first play of the game was a catch by an offensive lineman. You don't see that all the time. One of those deflected passes, tackle catches it. But this first quarter was full of field goal attempts, and it was a very, very ugly first quarter with the Rams botching their first field goal attempt, bad snap, Al Del Greco missing a kick from 47. And then finally a field goal converted, this time by St. Louis, 3-0 after the first quarter. And it just was, it was not fun to watch, Mike, to be honest with you.
Yeah, this first quarter left a lot to be desired for sure. Probably the two most intriguing parts of this quarter had nothing to do with the action on the field. Did you notice Floyd Reese, who was the GM of the Titans, that he watched the game from the coach's booth?
I did. And they talked about how he used to be a coach, and now he's kind of like standing over the shoulders of all his coaches.
Literally. That's a wild move.
Yeah.
With binoculars.
And it didn't seem like it was a big deal to them. Like even like to Boomer not mentioning it, I thought was kind of weird. Because, yeah, you definitely don't see that, the GM being that involved.
Yeah, the GM being that involved. I just thought that was crazy. I've never seen that before, ever.
Yeah, Floyd Reese.
And then the Titans, one thing of note is that the Titans D is playing very, very well in the red zone in this first quarter. Yeah. And it would be kind of a theme throughout the game, is the Titans defense really, really playing well.
Honestly, red zone defense, kind of in general is the story of this game on both sides. So 3-0 after the first quarter. And St. Louis, by the way, had 159 yards of offense, which was the third best opening quarter in Super Bowl history. So you had all that offense in 3 points. I'm thinking if I'm an over better right now, I'd just been so angry with the way that first quarter went in that game. So second quarter starts very much like it ended. A missed field goal early in this quarter by St. Louis. This time was actually missed. So now still 3-0. We got two missed field goals and a botched snap in this game so far. That's where we are in a Super Bowl, by the way. But Rams have another, they dominate much of this quarter, I think, in general. Have another good chance to score, as you mentioned. The red zone defense by the Titans steps up. Torrey Holt drops a touchdown catch, which Blaine Bishop makes a great play on. So they actually settle for a field goal, and it's 6-0 now in this game. And it's still field goal, field goal, field goal.
So essentially for the Rams right now, you have 4 trips to the red zone and 6 points.
Not good. That is not good.
That's crazy when you can say, and while all this is going along, Kurt Warner is amassing the passing yards in huge numbers. Yeah,
he's doing exactly what you'd expect him to do. They're just not getting the ball into the end zone, which gives Tennessee some hope here. But I thought another interesting conversation, like side note from the game, as they're talking about all the key players in this game and the schools they almost went to, which I didn't really remember too much. But Marshall Faulk wanted to go to Miami, but they wanted to play like defense or something. Eddie George wanted to go to Penn State, kind of close to his hometown. Steve McNair even wanted to go to Miami. So I was very interested to hear these guys. And again, this is peak Miami time right now with Butch Davis. So they kind of have their pick of players right now. But to miss on, especially Marshall Faulk, but Marshall Faulk and Steve McNair, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is wild. I could see maybe not seeing what Steve McNair could be, because
me too.
He was one of these first athletic quarterbacks who could also throw. And I think he kind of took everyone by surprise. I mean, he ended up at Alcorn State. So it's not like, Miami said no and he went to Florida State,
Yeah.
But Marshall Faulk, you saw Marshall Faulk from his first day at San Diego State when he was on TV, when he was a freshman. And you were like, what am I watching right now? This guy is awesome. So that's a big miss.
Yeah. That was
Eddie George too. Didn't Penn State want him to play like linebacker or something?
Yeah. Which, look, when you watch him play, you can kind of see it, like the size and stuff that, you could see him making that mistake. But then, in retrospect, you're like, God, this guy won a Heisman as a running back. How did you misevaluate him?
Yeah. It's not like he went to, Huckabucky U.
Huckabucky. Is that a real school?
Yeah. No, it's not.
But to your point, he ended up going to a rival and doing that. So just kind of even twist the knife even more for the Nittany Lions fans. But I thought that was an interesting conversation there in that quarter. You also had another field goal for St. Louis. Again, another deep drive into territory. It's 9-0 now. So again, just field goal here. And that's where we finished the half, 9-0. The big story of note, I tweeted a picture of the stats on Instagram, on a Distant Replay Instagram. 272 yards passing for Kurt Warner in the first half, which was only second all-time in a half to just Doug Williams. That's the only guy that had a better half of passing than Kurt Warner at this point. And it's still 9-0. And the other note is Titans are the 10th team to be held scoreless in the first half. And up to that point, all 9 others had lost. That was about it. Not a whole lot else to talk about there. Do you have any other notes in the first half that you picked up?
All right, so Warner has the most pass attempts in the first half in Super Bowl history. Okay, 277 yards passing. They aren't even trying to run the ball, getting back to what I was saying about Mike Martz before. And they're getting Falk involved in the passing game, but they do have Marshall Falk. They have 8 runs and 36 passes to this point.
It's crazy.
The Titans only have 89 yards of total offense. And the Rams, again, getting back to their defense, they're doing a good job on Eddie George. Eddie George, 7 carries for 18 yards.
Yeah, the 36 passing attempt, I had to do a double take. I knew they were throwing a lot, but dude, I was like, 30. He's already thrown 36 pass attempts? That's
they're
remarkable.
And they're all like these routes that the Rams ran during this time were all deep crossing routes, long routes. And so, you're putting the quarterback at a lot of risk. Their offensive line, I thought, never got enough credit because Warner, you saw a lot of these teams try to replicate this offense as the years went on, and they would get their quarterbacks crushed.
Yeah.
But a lot of these passes, these yards add up quick because the average pass is 15, 20 yards.
Right. Well, second half, Titans start with the ball. By the way, I like to always kind of point out who was performing at halftime. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Do you remember? You probably don't remember, Mike.
I don't.
But they did this was an ABC Disney kind of halftime performance. It was an E-Trade Super Bowl halftime show. So it was produced by Disney, entitled Tapestry of Nations. It was like an Epcot parade. Essentially, they rolled out there, but they also had some performers of note. It was more of a Disney production, but they also brought out Phil Collins, Christina Aguilera, Enrique Iglesias, Tony Braxton, all performed halftime. So kind of an interesting, I think you see it's more about one artist now. You kind of see this halftime show kind of evolve over the years, but interesting that it was a Disney type show at halftime of this game. Don't remember that at all.
I mean, Enrique Iglesias, Tony Braxton, and Christina Aguilera. That's a 1999-2000 lineup right there.
Yeah, no doubt.
I have a buddy who went to go see Enrique Iglesias in concert, and he didn't. And the funniest thing is, he didn't give the context, like, "Oh, my girlfriend likes her, and that's why I went." Like, he just made it sound like he was like he led the charge. And
right.
I want to go to Enrique Iglesias. And
wow.
He got made fun of pretty bad. Whenever I think of Enrique Iglesias, that's what I think of.
Yeah, I don't know anybody that went to one of his concerts. That's interesting.
Yeah, no one does. He's just that kind of guy who was going to go to an Enrique Iglesias concert if that was the decision that was made, if you know what I mean.
There you go. All right, third quarter, Titans get the ball to start the half. They need something going, and they get off to a pretty good start, have one of their better drives of the half. But guess what? They have a 47-yard field goal again. Al Del Greco gets it blocked. And I don't fault Del Greco as much on this one, but I think I talked to you about this during the game we did, Music City Miracle, that Del Greco, he had a good career, but man, he missed some big kicks over his career, especially in the playoffs. And this was kind of just another example of just, you didn't have a lot of confidence when he got out there. He would end up making one later in this game, but again, at this point, you haven't done much offensively, and your 2 scoring opportunities have gone by the wayside. There's not a lot to kind of cling to right now if you're a Titans fan.
No, there really isn't. I mean, I felt the same way watching this game, Ben, as I felt watching the Music City Miracle. They're just stagnant on offense.
Yeah. And
when they couldn't get Eddie George going, it was like very, very uninspiring football. But the one thing about the Titans that held true in this era with Jeff Fisher is, to his credit, they always played hard and they were always in the game.
Yep, they were always in the game. One of the biggest plays of the game, big moments of the game, came on the Rams' first possession. Blaine Bishop, the starting safety, tackled a guy kind of helmet down, just right into him, and didn't knock him unconscious. Of course, that's per the reports during the game, but he was down on the field. I think he kind of strained his neck or pinched a nerve or whatever it was, but he was down on the ground, had to be taken off on a stretcher. Not a good thing. But now the Titans at this point were down Bishop and Marcus Robertson, another one of their the secondary players, key secondary players. So they're down 2 guys in their secondary against this offense, and that I kind of forgot about this, but that was kind of a big turning point, I think, in this game. Not that the Titans were in the lead or anything at this point, but their defense had held up enough, and Bishop had made some plays, and they kind of frustrated the Rams, I think, at this point. They'd get up to the yards, but still, you could tell that the Rams sideline was frustrated, was not being able to get in the end zone. Vermeil was. But you had Perry Phoenix check into this game. Don't remember this guy at all. He was now playing in place of Bishop. And 2 plays later, you got a St. Louis touchdown. Warner hits Holt 10 yards. It's now 16-0.
Yeah. And this Titans secondary, that injury to Blaine Bishop was kind of like oh, come on. One of those, we're doing really well, but that was a very tough injury for them. Warner to Holt, 16-0. It's the first TD of the game right? 7 minutes left in the third quarter. And we get the first bob and weave of the day. Remember the bob and weave?
The whole bob and weave, yeah.
Remember that? Nelly, the rapper Nelly would make this famous in some of the songs he had. Very, very happening time for St. Louis. We're coming off the McGuire, home run chase. What a time to be in St. Louis.
Missed the 90s, man. Great time. So it's 16-0 at this point. Titans again. They feel like they're just about out of this, although it's technically a 2-score game. McNair kind of starts to take over here at this point, making plays with his legs. He has a huge run on this next drive, gets them inside the 10. I thought this was kind of a big turning point in the game as well for the Titans. Second goal from the 1. Titans ended up taking a timeout. McNair, I guess, couldn't get the offense set up. They didn't have their play ready, whatever. But there's 17 seconds left in the third quarter, and the clock's ticking after a run on first down. So instead of just letting their clock run out if you don't feel comfortable there and just getting the play on the 1-yard line to start the fourth, they take a timeout there. Next play, they do get in the end zone. Eddie George pops it in. But I thought taking a timeout there was an odd decision. You would see that
I made special, knowing how this game ended, I made special notes of when the timeouts were taken here for the Titans. And, they would need these timeouts later, as we all know. And this, looking back on it, this is one of those decisions that could be nothing depending on the way the game turns out, or it could mean, a lot. And I think the thinking is here, when you're down 16-0, you just don't want to, you don't want to lose yards whenever you think you can prevent it,
Yeah, and I guess, getting an extra play in before the quarter is also a good thing, but I just think that timeout, to me, it didn't make much sense. But the other big player here was that McNair misses Wycheck on the 2-point conversion, which he had him, but Wycheck kind of sat down on his route, didn't kind of continue. McNair led him, and then it was just kind of a missed connection there. But had him open and could have made it 16-8 instead of 16-6 heading to the fourth quarter. But Titans are gaining momentum here. The Rams have to punt early on. The Rams kind of slow down their offense here over about a 10 or 12-minute stretch in this game. And you had another big call with the Titans, a 4th and inches call. I love this call because it was one of those where you always see the quarterback get over center, try to get the defense off sides. He did that. McNair did that for a second and then quickly snuck it and got the first down. You don't get this. You don't really see that, the fake draw them offside sneak a whole lot.
No, you don't. Yeah, I know. They barely converted that.
Yeah. And they're on side of the field too.
That was a close one, and that would ended the game right there, I think.
I think you had to go for it there too.
You did. Yeah, for sure.
Play you had to make.
And then what I thought was very interesting again is the Titans take their second timeout with 8 minutes and 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter, which I thought again was huge.
Yeah, that was another big one. Again, don't understand it quite as much because in retrospect, obviously it's a big deal, but just another spot where I just thought was an odd time for a timeout. But they had to take it. They did take it, and it would end up coming back to bite them in the butt a little bit. So the Titans, again, they're moving the ball pretty well in this quarter. The Rams aren't. It's kind of been the opposite of what we've seen all game. Another huge play in this game, too, that was could have been a game ender for the Titans. They had this little, I think it came after that timeout, right? This little throwback to Jackie Harris, the tight end, kind of a backside screen play where kind of McNair rolls out to the right, throws it back over to the left. The guy's wide open there. But Grant Wistrom was about 3 inches from picking that ball off. McNair floated it perfectly over his head. So instead of it being a pick, and maybe even a pick six if he makes that play, it goes 30 yards down to the 3-yard line, and Eddie George punches it in the next play. That was just a huge, huge play. And I think at that point you're like, okay, the Titans now, every little play, every little break is starting to go their way now.
Yeah, and if I would have told you in the fourth quarter of this game, besides McNair and Eddie George, that Isaac Byrd and Jackie Harris would play the biggest roles for the Titans, you down the stretch, you would be like, who?
Yeah, right. I know.
This drive you just mentioned had big plays to Isaac Byrd to play to Harris after the almost interception by Wistrom.
Yep.
And even following drives would just have huge plays by Jack. They're in the middle of everything in this quarter, those two.
Yep. So 16-13, Rams, again, do nothing. Punt the ball back, get the Titans the ball back near the 50. So, Titans, again, went from 16-0 almost in the third quarter to now having the ball down 3 at midfield with 6:17 left. Now the Rams are the ones back on their heels a little bit. And McNair's starting to move the ball pretty well at this point. They have to settle for a field goal here. And again, this was a very slow, methodical drive just ending in a field goal. They They milk 4 minutes off the clock. There's 2:12 left. They tie it 16-16, and this is the point. At this point, it was the largest deficit to ever be erased in a Super Bowl at that time, and the first time ever somebody came back to tie it up down 10 or more.
Those stats were eye-popping to me when they showed them.
Yeah.
And also equally as eye-popping was the guy with the sign. Did you notice the guy with the sign I'm about to talk about?
I'm not sure. Go ahead.
When Del Greco was kicking towards this goalpost, there was a guy sitting right in between the goalposts in the stands with an automatic Al sign. He was sitting
I didn't see that.
Literally in the middle of the goalpost, and every time Del Greco kicked the ball, when you saw the ball traveling to go through the goalpost in this case to tie the game, the sign was in the air. It said automatic Al. How did that guy notice it there?
I don't know. That's hilarious. No, I didn't notice that at all.
Yeah, so Del Greco ties the game, and with 2 minutes and 5 seconds, the Rams get the ball back.
Yep. First play, Hall of Famer Isaac Bruce makes a beautiful catch, breaks a couple tackles. You've seen the play, 73 yards. And just like that, the Titans work all the way back, tied up 16-16, and then the big play offense of the Rams finally strikes on a long one. And at this point, you're going, okay, this pretty much ball game, you would think at this point.
Yeah, so this is a forgotten play nominee because
yeah,
unless you're a Rams fan, because of how the way this game ended, this is effectively what it is a pass, a 73-yard pass with less than 2 minutes left to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
When you say it like that, yeah.
And puts Warner over 400 yards, and this play is never talked about. Maybe if you're in a bar in St. Louis and you're reminiscing about the old days, maybe it comes up, but no one remembers this play at all. And it was an awesome play, just a remarkable play.
You're exactly right, because when they score and the Titans scored tied up, I was thinking, wait, how did we get to this final play? Because, at first I was thinking on that drive when the Titans kicked the field goal, I was like, okay, maybe this is the drive. They just get it all the way down there. But I'd forgotten that big play. I remembered it when it happened, but yeah, that's a great point. Forgotten play nominee.
This was for sure. We have to look into that. But look, this is the second time. This Super Bowl was the first time in my life, because it's up to this point, it always seemed like the teams who should win the Super Bowls kind of won them.
Yep.
Upset here or there, but the favorites usually won. Or if it was a toss-up game, it was a toss-up game. When the Titans tied this game, I remember thinking to myself, like, is this Rams team really going to lose to the Titans? And then this play happens, and you're like, oh, okay, all is right with the world.
Yeah.
The other time I got that feeling is when the Cardinals went up on the Steelers before that last Steelers drive. They actually took the lead.
Right.
And I remember thinking, are the Cardinals going to win the Super Bowl? This is so weird. But then, right on cue, the Steelers drove down.
Yep. Big teams make big plays. And that's what happens here. I think the big play here in this drive, McNair scramble, that the Rams basically have him down as time's running down, just ticking down under like 20 or 30 seconds. And he makes an incredible play just to avoid a sack and then finds Dyson to get him down to the 10-yard line to set up that final play. And 6 seconds left. You've seen it. McNair hits Dyson. He cuts into the middle and gets all the way down to the one, stretches out, and cannot get it over the goal line. For one of the epic finishes in Super Bowl history, to see Dyson get that close again, it's tough to watch. But, man, one of the best finishes you're ever to see. I mean, it's up there with Malcolm Butler. There's a couple other really good ones. But, just for the actual very last final play of the game, it doesn't get much better.
Yeah, as far as non-field goal late game moments go in Super Bowls, I think it's this one, and it's Malcolm Butler.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the two that I think of. And I thought they brought up a good point on the broadcast in real time about the Rams' defensive alignment, how they had 4 or 5 guys across the goal line. So this was the only kind of play that would even work.
Yeah.
Because you hear some people say over the years, well, why didn't they throw a pass to the end zone? But then Boomer did a good job about first saying, hey, they need to pass the ball to the end zone, but then sort of retracting that a little bit and saying they couldn't do that because of the Rams' defensive alignment. They had 4 or 5 guys stretch across the goal line. So this was the best play available for the Titans. They executed it. And look, Mike Jones just made a heck of a tackle. There's no two ways about it. Just a great football play.
Yeah, you like seeing somebody make a play, right? Rather than like somebody blowing a play or fumbling at the one or, whatever it is. The guy made a play to win the game.
Steve McNair threw a great pass. Kevin Dyson made a good catch. tried his darndest to get in, and Mike Jones just made a better play. I couldn't agree more. I like these outcomes better than, Norwood being a GOAT, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. 23-16 final in this game. Warner 24 of 45 for 414, 2 touchdowns. McNair 22 of 36 for 214. Then you had Holt and Bruce both over 100 yards receiving. Jackie Harris led the way for the Titans, 7 catches, 64, followed by Frank Wycheck. Okay, so that was the passing attack for the Titans in a nutshell. Super Bowl MVP, of course, Kurt Warner became the 6th player ever to win both the MVP award during the regular season and in the Super Bowl in the same season. And those 414 yards and 45 passing attempts without an interception broke Super Bowl records. The Rams that year as well outscored their opponents 526 to 242, which was the highest scoring margin of any Super Bowl champion.
That's a stat right there, because that speaks to the defense just as much as it speaks to the offense.
Yep.
And this game for Warner was the last chapter in the storybook.
There it is.
That's the perfect way to put it.
The biggest what if for me is if the Titans wouldn't use those 2 timeouts or at least had 1 extra timeout, I think they definitely could have gotten 1 more play out of that final drive. So I think, even if I think they would have had enough time if they get that Dyson play to maybe spike the ball, depending on kind of how the rest of that drive played out. But I think they would have had time for at least 1 more play if they had an extra timeout. And also injuries to the Titans there in the secondary. If that doesn't happen, does it make a difference having Blaine Bishop in there, Marcus Robertson, for those couple of touchdowns that happened after they were both out of the game? You have any what ifs?
Hey, first, before I get into mine, that was a great one, Ben, because your first natural inclination is for a what if moment is, well, the team ran out of time. How could they have gotten more time?
Yeah.
And hey, look, they used their timeouts. But my what if is, what if Trent Green and Kevin Gilbride were the coach quarterback combination for the Rams? Does any of this even happen? I think that's the biggest what if, right? I think obviously the answer to that is it does not happen.
Right.
And, I think that's the biggest what if. And you have Warner come right in, 41 touchdowns, 13 interception season with over 4,000 yards, which was not that common back then, coupled with sort of the steady hand of Dick Vermeil. And next thing you know, a team that was thought to be dead in August is hoisting the Super Bowl trophy in January. So just an incredible story.
Yeah, we usually get hung up on injuries as fans, right? Getting upset about especially a starting quarterback getting hurt. But
oh, look, Ben, you're talking to – do you remember when Pennington – there's a year where Chad Pennington got hurt in the preseason?
Yeah.
And I was like, he got hurt in, I think, that Jet-Giant game. Remember, the Jets and Giants play every year?
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, I'm not going to watch football this year. Like, I gave up right away. Like, that's the most devastating injury that could probably happen in sports.
Yeah. Is
a quarterback getting hurt in the preseason.
Especially when you have Kurt Warner in his past, right, up to that point. This is a guy that was playing for the Amsterdam Admirals a couple of years in 1998. So just to kind of give you some perspective there for that. So that's a wrap on this game. Outdated-wise, a couple of things I had. The broadcasting booth now looks so sophisticated with the green screens and technology. Back then, it was Al Michaels and Boomer sitting right next to each other with like a little curtain draped behind them and a small TV adjacent to them. Very, very simple times back then. This also was the first Super Bowl to air in high definition in 5.1 Dolby Digital. Bet you didn't remember that.
I didn't. And, I say this every episode when we go back to this time period, because this is when we were, high school, end of high school, early college for both of us. And I just can't believe that it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it really hits you when you watch like the broadcast of how long ago it actually was and how things have evolved.
Yeah, and even in this game, they didn't have the clock and score in all the time. I mean, it was in most plays, but it wasn't something that stayed in the game all the time, which is still crazy to think about. Also outdated. Pro Bowl was still after the Super Bowl and still in Hawaii. Boomer was talking about throwing on his leg and heading out to the islands after this game was over with. They don't get that trip anymore. It's Orlando now, right? And then the other one I thought was interesting about the nugget about this game was this game is often referred to as the .com Super Bowl because this is right in the middle of the .com bubble. And there's a number of internet companies that spent a ton of money on television commercials. E-Trade ran their commercial with a chimpanzee dancing in an E-Trade t-shirt that said,
I remember. Well,
we wasted $2 million. Lifeminders.com. Don't even remember that website. They ran a commercial just plain typewritten text that said, this is the worst commercial on the Super Bowl, but it might be the best thing you see tonight. And then you had pets.com. They paid millions for an ad featuring a sock puppet. That's featuring a sock puppet, and the company would end up collapsing before the year was over. The .com bubble, Mike.
What a time to be alive.
Any outdated for you?
No, you hit on a lot of them. The biggest one I was going to bring up was the Pro Bowl. And that's back when the Pro Bowl wasn't a complete joke.
Right. Yeah. It meant something. One other note on this game, Mike. Do you remember what happened after this game?
Right after it?
Yep.
Was it, I don't want to be wrong here if I'm wrong, was it Ray Lewis?
Ray Lewis. The whole Ray Lewis. He was in Buckhead, just about a few miles from the stadium, North Atlanta. And that case, the murder case that he was involved with there, happened that night after the Super Bowl as he was out partying.
You go this entire offseason hearing about that, and then the whole next season was the Ravens run to the Super Bowl, right?
Yep. Maybe we throw that in the true crime episodes.
Maybe.
Ray Lewis.
Maybe.
All right.
I don't know much. You bring up a good point. I don't know much about that case at all.
It's very interesting if you dig into it a little bit. Very interesting. I don't think they still don't have anybody responsible for those two murders. So
interesting.
There you go. Put it on your list. Dig it up. All right, let's close it out on that note. Enjoyed having you on this episode of Distant Replay, going back to Super Bowl 34, January 30th, 2000. Remember, you can watch the game in its entirety on our website, distantreplaypodcast.com, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Please hit subscribe, rate and review. We'd appreciate all that. That helps us out a ton. But we enjoyed having you here on the show again. And Mike, enjoyed this episode.
Same here, guys. Until next time.